Imagine you're walking through the streets of Florence, Italy, in the year 1492. The air smells like stone dust and fresh bread. Around you, people are arguing passionately about whether a new painting is divine genius or dangerous blasphemy. A guy named Leonardo just finished a portrait that makes everyone weep at its beauty. And somewhere in a workshop, a 23-year-old Michelangelo is chipping away at a block of marble, convinced he's going to change the world. Now here's the wild part. None of these people call what they're living through the Renaissance. That word, Renaissance meaning rebirth, won't be invented for another 300 years. They're just living, making art, questioning everything, turning Europe upside down without even realizing it. So what exactly was this Renaissance? Why did it start in Italy of all places? And why does it still matter to you? Watching this video on your phone right now. Let's find out. What exactly is the Renaissance? The Renaissance was a cultural, artistic, and intellectual movement that swept across Europe roughly between the 14th and 17th centuries. But here's the thing. It's not like someone woke up one morning and said, "All right, today the Middle Ages are over, let's rebirth." No, it happened slowly, like a caterpillar. But fancier. Think of it this way. The Middle Ages were like that friend who always plays it safe. Religious, traditional, cautious. The Renaissance was that friend's more adventurous roommate who said, "What if we actually looked at the world? What if we studied how bodies work, how light works, how people feel?" The Renaissance was fundamentally about returning to the classical learning of ancient Greece and Rome, the original cool kids of Western civilization, and then going way beyond them. It was about human potential, about asking why instead of just because the church said so. But, and this is important, the Renaissance wasn't a single event. It was a vibe, a mindset, a bunch of wealthy Italian city-states deciding that maybe, just maybe, they wanted to be more than just places where people farmed and prayed. Why Italy? The birthplace of a boom. Here's a question that bugs a lot of history students. Why Italy? Of all places, why did this explosion of genius happen in a boot-shaped peninsula that at the time wasn't even a unified country? The answer is basically money, location, and a whole lot of ego. First, let's talk money. By the 14th century, Italian city-states like Venice, Florence, and Milan had become ridiculously wealthy through trade. They were the Amazon.com of medieval commerce, shipping spices, silks, and luxury goods across the Mediterranean. This new merchant class had money to burn, and they wanted to spend it on something other than more warehouses. They wanted prestige. They wanted their cities to look as amazing as ancient Rome once did. So they started funding artists, architects, and scholars, basically saying, "Make us famous." Second, location. Italy sat right in the middle of everything. It was the crossroads of Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. Ideas flowed through Italian ports like water through a fire hose. You had Muslim scholars sharing knowledge, Byzantine refugees bringing ancient Greek texts, and traders from every corner of the known world, swapping stories and secrets. Third, and this is the fun part, Italian city-states were basically competing reality TV shows. Florence wanted to be fancier than Siena. Venice wanted to be richer than Genoa. Each city poured resources into looking better than its rivals. The result? An arms race of art, architecture, and genius. And here's a little secret. The Catholic Church was basically the biggest art patron of all. The popes wanted Rome to look as magnificent as possible, which meant hiring the best artists money could buy. When the papacy moved back to Rome after a century in France, it sparked even more artistic investment. Cha-ching. The arts, when painters became rock stars. Before the Renaissance, artists were basically skilled laborers. Useful, sure, respected, kind of. But nobody was putting them on magazine covers or writing fan mail. Then something changed. Suddenly, artists weren't just craftspeople following religious orders. They were creators. They were geniuses. They were, dare we say it, rock stars. And the works they produced, they're still tourist magnets today. Let's run through the greatest hits. Leonardo da Vinci painted the Mona Lisa, the most famous smile in history, and The Last Supper, which basically invented the emotional close-up. He also dissected corpses to understand human anatomy better, designed flying machines, and made to-do lists that would make even the most organized person feel inadequate. We'll talk more about him later because honestly, he deserves it. Michelangelo painted the Sistine Chapel ceiling. Yes, that one, lying on his back for 4 years, and sculpted David, which is basically a 17-foot-tall marble flex. He once said he saw the figure inside the marble and just had to chip away everything that wasn't David. No big deal. Raphael painted the School of Athens, showing all the great philosophers of antiquity hanging out together like a golden age TED Talk. His work was so perfect that later critics literally called it divine. Botticelli gave us the birth of Venus, where a goddess literally rises from the sea in a seashell. If that's not a music video concept, I don't know what is. What made these artists different? They weren't just copying religious iconography anymore. They were studying anatomy, perspective, light, and human emotion. They were making the sacred feel real. When you look at a Renaissance painting, you don't just see saints, you see people. Real people with real feelings, caught in real moments. And the audience noticed. Artists went from being called craftsmen to being called divine. Princes collected them. Kings fought over them. A painting by Leonardo was worth more than some small towns. They had groupies. Okay, maybe not groupies, but definitely very enthusiastic fans. The Renaissance man, doing it all and doing it well. If the Renaissance had a mascot, it wouldn't be a lion or an eagle. It would be Leonardo da Vinci. Why? Because Leonardo was the ultimate Renaissance man, a term that literally describes someone who's excellent at many different things. Writer, mathematician, engineer, musician, painter, inventor, anatomist, and occasional unicyclist. Okay, maybe not that last one, but wouldn't it be great if he was? The idea was simple. Why specialize when you can be extraordinary at everything? The Renaissance worshipped polymaths, people who believed that understanding the whole picture was better than just knowing one tiny piece. And Leonardo was the king of this. His notebooks are filled with sketches of flying machines, next to studies of water flow, next to jokes about priests. He was basically a walking Wikipedia article, if Wikipedia articles could also paint the Mona Lisa. But Leonardo wasn't alone. Filippo Brunelleschi was an architect who also figured out linear perspective, the mathematical way to make paintings look 3D, which basically revolutionized art overnight. Leon Battista Alberti wrote treatises on everything from architecture to cryptography to horsemanship. Even Michelangelo, despite being best known for sculpture and painting, also wrote poetry that was genuinely good. The Renaissance man wasn't just talented, he was curious. He believed that every subject was connected, that art could inform science, that engineering could inspire art, that understanding the past could change the future. And here's the wild part. This idea still shapes how we think about well-rounded education today. When your college insists you take classes outside your major, you're basically living the Renaissance dream. If you're enjoying this deep dive into history, you're going to love our other videos. And subscribe if you haven't already, because more history goodness is coming your way. Next, the printing press, the medieval iPhone. Okay, let's talk about the invention that arguably changed humanity more than any painting or sculpture, the printing press. Johannes Gutenberg invented it around 1440 in Germany. And if you think that's boring, consider this. The printing press was basically the medieval iPhone. It connected people, spread ideas, and made information accessible to the masses. It also maybe, sort of, accidentally started a few religious revolutions, but we'll get to that. Before Gutenberg, every book was handwritten. This meant books were incredibly expensive, rare, and full of small errors, because humans are humans. If you wanted to read something, you either needed a lot of money, a lot of time, or a very patient monastery. Then came the press. Suddenly, books could be produced quickly, cheaply, and accurately. Within 50 years of Gutenberg's invention, there were printed books in every major European city. Within 100 years, more books had been printed than all the manuscripts produced in the previous 1,000 years. The implications were staggering. First, ideas spread fast. A new philosophical concept in Florence could reach London in weeks instead of years. Scientists could share discoveries across continents. Political pamphlets could mobilize populations. Second, literacy exploded. If you wanted to sell books, you needed readers. If you wanted readers, people needed to learn to read. Education became more accessible. The middle class started getting educated for the first time. Third, and this is the big one, the printing press helped the Protestant Reformation happen. Martin Luther's 95 Theses, a list of complaints about the Catholic Church, were printed and distributed across Europe in weeks. The Church couldn't suppress them because there were too many copies. The religious landscape of Europe was permanently changed. The printing press didn't just spread information, it democratized it. It gave ordinary people access to the same ideas that had once been locked away in palaces and monasteries. Invention, revolutionary, evolution, inevitable. The iPhone of its day, absolutely. Science and the new way of thinking. The Renaissance wasn't just about art and books, it was also about fundamentally changing how humans thought about the world and their place in it. For centuries, the Catholic Church basically held a monopoly on truth. Not just religious truth, all truth. If Aristotle said something was true and the Church agreed, then that was it. Questioning it wasn't just wrong, it was dangerous. But Renaissance thinkers started asking different questions. Instead of, what does the Church say about this? They asked, what can I observe? What can I measure? What actually happens? This new approach had a fancy name, empiricism. It basically means learning through experience and observation, rather than just accepting what authorities told you. Nicholas Copernicus looked at the sky and said, wait a minute, what if the Earth isn't the center of the universe? His heliocentric model, placing the sun at the center, would eventually revolutionize astronomy, even though he was too scared to publish it until he was on his deathbed. Galileo Galilei pointed a telescope at Jupiter and discovered moons orbiting it, proving that not everything revolved around Earth. He was eventually put under house arrest for this, which tells you how threatening new ideas were to the established order. Andreas Vesalius dissected human corpses, gasp, to create detailed anatomical drawings that are still studied today. Before him, doctors relied on animal anatomy and ancient texts. He said, let's actually look inside a human body and see what's there. The Renaissance scientists weren't trying to overthrow religion. Many were deeply religious themselves. They just believed you could use observation and faith together. You could study God's creation while believing in God. This new way of thinking, let's call it skeptical curiosity, laid the groundwork for the scientific revolution that would follow. And that revolution gave us modern medicine, physics, astronomy, and basically everything else that makes the modern world work. How the Renaissance rewired Europe. So far we've talked about art, science, and printing, but the Renaissance didn't just change culture, it literally reshaped European society. Let's break it down. The rise of the individual. Before the Renaissance, you were born into your place in society, and that was that. The Renaissance celebrated personal achievement, individual talent, and personal glory. Want to be famous? Go out and earn it. This idea that you could define yourself through your actions rather than your birth would eventually fuel everything from the Protestant work ethic to modern entrepreneurship. The decline of feudalism. As cities grew wealthier and the merchant class gained power, the old feudal system, where lords owned everything and peasants worked the land, started to crumble. Trade networks replaced manor economies. Money replaced land as the measure of wealth. The birth of the modern state. Renaissance rulers needed to project power. They built armies, bureaucracies, and spy networks. They commissioned propaganda in the form of art and architecture. They created the foundations of the nation-state, the political unit that would dominate world politics for the next 500 years. Education for everyone. Well, everyone male and wealthy, but still. Schools and universities proliferated. Classical texts were taught alongside religious ones. Literacy rose. The idea that knowledge was valuable, not just spiritually, but practically, became mainstream. Religious upheaval. This one is huge. The Renaissance's emphasis on returning to original sources led scholars to read the Bible in Hebrew and Greek, rather than just the Latin Vulgate. They asked, is this what the original text actually says? This critical thinking about religious texts was a direct precursor to the Protestant Reformation. Art becomes commerce. For the first time, artists could sell their work on the open market. They could compete for commissions. They could become famous and wealthy based on talent, rather than just guild membership. This market for art created the conditions for the star system we have today. The Renaissance didn't just change what Europeans thought, it changed how they lived. The end of the Renaissance and its legacy. Here's a question historians still argue about. When did the Renaissance end? Some say it faded gradually into the Baroque period, where art became more dramatic and emotional. Others say it died when the Protestant Reformation split Europe into warring religious camps in the 1500s. Some point to 1527, when troops sacked Rome and destroyed much of the city's artistic heritage. But here's the thing, the Renaissance didn't really end, it spread. Italian artists and ideas traveled north to France, Germany, England, and the Netherlands. The Northern Renaissance, featuring artists like Albrecht Dürer, Jan van Eyck, and Hans Holbein, had its own flavor, often more focused on detailed realism and religious reform than Italian humanism. And the ideas? They never really went away. The emphasis on observation, individual achievement, classical learning, and questioning authority became foundational to Western civilization. The Renaissance planted seeds that would bloom into the Enlightenment, the Scientific Revolution, the American and French Revolutions, and eventually the modern world. You want to know if the Renaissance is still alive? Look around you. You live in a world where individuals can become famous through talent and work, where books and information spread instantly, where scientists observe and experiment, where art is bought and sold in galleries, where universities teach critical thinking. That's the Renaissance. That's the legacy. It didn't end. It just became normal. Why it matters today. Let's bring this home. You're watching this video on a device that would seem like magic to a Renaissance artist. You have access to more information than any king in history. You can learn anything, communicate with anyone, create and share your own art with the entire world. That's not an accident. That's the Renaissance legacy. The Renaissance taught us that humans can achieve extraordinary things, that questioning received wisdom is a virtue, that looking at the world carefully, really seeing it, can reveal truths that change everything. It taught us that a florist's son from Vinci could become the most brilliant mind in history, that a poor sculptor from Caprese could carve beauty from marble, that a German inventor with a weird name could connect the world. And it taught us that culture matters, that art matters, that beauty and truth and knowledge are worth fighting for, even when it's hard, even when it's dangerous, even when nobody's watching. The Renaissance isn't just a period in a textbook, it's a way of looking at the world. It's the belief that any of us, can make something extraordinary. So the next time you create something, learn something, or question something, just know that you're carrying on a tradition that started 600 years ago in the streets of Florence. You're a Renaissance person. Now go create something. So there you have it, the Renaissance from start to finish. If this video made you think, if it made you curious, if it made you appreciate that guy in the museum a little more, then do us a solid, Share this video with a friend who's into history, or just someone who needs to know why Italy is shaped like a boot. Also, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, because we're constantly unpacking the stories behind the events that shaped our world. And if you've got a topic you want us to cover, drop it in the comments below. We read everything. Thanks for watching. Now let's get into that. Bonus fact. Here's something you probably didn't know. Michelangelo was so obsessed with the David that he reportedly kissed its fingers while working on it. And when the sculpture was finally unveiled in 1504, the entire city of Florence celebrated like they'd won the Super Bowl. They held a parade. They gave Michelangelo a lifetime pension. The entire population, estimates say around 10,000 people, flocked to see it in the first 2 weeks alone. That's like if every person in a small city waited in line for hours to see a single statue. Now that's star power.